Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. Can an HOA legally force you to pay their fees if you never signed a contract with them? My neighborhood HOA certainly thought so. They started billing me, harassing me, and even dumped their property on my lawn. But when they threatened me, they made a critical mistake. They gave a retired project manager a problem to solve, and my solution was something they never saw coming. I want to start by saying I am not someone who looks for fights. I spent over 30 years as a project manager, which basically means my entire career was built around keeping things calm, staying organized, and resolving problems before they got out of hand. I retired a few years ago, and the only agenda I have now is coffee in the morning, tending to my garden, and making sure the gutters get cleaned before winter. That is the full scope of my ambitions. I am not kidding. So when this whole mess started, my first reaction was not anger, it was just confusion. That is important for you to understand because the way I handled it later was a direct result of who I am, not some heroic act. I am just a guy who kept his paperwork in order. Turns out, that was enough. Let me back up. I bought my house in the early 90s. It is a single-story place built in the 70s. Nothing fancy, but it has good bones and a decent-sized yard with some mature trees that I am very attached to. The neighborhood around it has changed a lot over the years. The fields that used to sit on three sides of me got bought up sometime in the mid-2000s by a developer. And they put up one of those big planned communities, you know the kind. Every house is 2 stories, every lawn is the same shade of green, every mailbox is the same brushed aluminum. The whole thing went up fast and the HOA came along with it as a condition of buying in. My property was never part of that. My lot predates all of it by decades. My deed is clear, my property lines are registered with the county, and at no point did I ever sign anything connecting me to that HOA. I want to be very clear about that because it is the entire foundation of what happened next. For about 15 years, I had been using the same small trash company, a family-owned operation that had serviced my area since before the development even broke ground. I paid them quarterly. They showed up every single week without fail, and the owner's son had been the one driving the truck since he was old enough to get a commercial license. It was one of those arrangements you stop thinking about because it just works. Simple, reliable, no drama. The drama started on a Tuesday. I was going through the mail at the kitchen table, which is something I do every week. I sorted into 3 piles: bills and financial stuff, general correspondence, and junk. I had just moved a furniture catalog into the junk pile when I pulled out an invoice from a company I had never heard of. It was printed on thick paper, looked very professional, and was billing me $90 for something called Quarterly Residential Waste Services. My first thought was that it was a mistake, maybe a misprint on the address. The invoice had no account number attached to my name, no prior correspondence reference, nothing that indicated I had ever agreed to any service from this company. It looked like someone had accidentally dropped my address into a mailing list. I set it aside on the corner of the table with the intention of calling them in the next day or two to get it sorted out. Then life happened, as it does, and I forgot about it entirely. About a month later, I was going through the mail again and there was a second notice, but this one was different. It was not from the waste company. It was from the HOA for the development next door. Now that got my attention. The statement showed the original $90 charge from the waste company, and added to it was a $25 late fee. The message on the statement was one of those carefully worded things that manages to sound polite while also being a quiet threat. It said something along the lines of all residents in the area being required to participate in the community's unified waste management program, and that failure to remit payment would result in continued penalties. It had an official tone that was clearly designed to make you feel like you had already lost. I sat there for a minute just staring at it, not panicking, just thinking. The logical thing was to call and sort it out. Obviously, there had been an administrative error somewhere. Someone at the HOA had included my address in their database when they should not have. This was a clerical mistake, not some kind of conspiracy. I was not worried. I called the waste management company first because their number was on the original invoice. The person I spoke to was perfectly pleasant but could not help me. She explained that their contract was with the HOA, that the HOA supplied them with the list of properties to service and bill, and that any disagreement about whether my property should be on that list needed to go through the HOA board directly. She was apologetic but firm. There was nothing she could do on her end. Fine. I called the HOA. The number listed for the HOA board went to the HOA president directly. I did not know that when I dialed. The woman who picked up had one of those voices that is very warm on the surface, but you can sense immediately there is no warmth underneath it. She introduced herself as the board president and asked how she could help in a tone that made it clear she already considered this a slight inconvenience she was graciously tolerating. I explained the situation calmly. I told her I had been receiving invoices from the waste company, and then a follow-up statement from the HOA itself, and that I believed there had been an error because my property was not part of the HOA. She did not even pause. She said there was no mistake, that if I lived in the area then I was part of the HOA, and that the board had recently voted to consolidate all waste services into a single program for the sake of community uniformity. I told her, still calmly, that I understood what she was saying, but that my property legally predated the development and had never been incorporated into the HOA. I had been at this address for over 20 years before the subdivision existed. She said that was not what their records showed. I asked her what records she was referring to. She said the board maintained their own property database and that my address was in it, which meant I was subject to HOA rules and fees. I told her that a database maintained by a private HOA board did not override a county recorded property deed, and that is when her tone shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. She told me that if I refused to pay, fees would continue to accumulate, and that the HOA had the ability to place a lien on my property. Then she said to have a nice day and hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. The lien comment was not something I could just wave off. A lien is a real legal instrument that attaches to a property title. Even if it was based on a completely fraudulent claim, having one filed against your home is a serious problem, especially if you ever want to sell or refinance. She knew exactly what she was doing by saying it. Up to that point, I had assumed good faith on everyone's part, a mistake that would get sorted out with a couple phone calls. That conversation ended that assumption. This was not a clerical error. This was a deliberate attempt to rope my property into their jurisdiction without any legal basis to do so. I did not get angry, though. I got organized. Over the next few days, I pulled out my property file, which I kept in a fireproof filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. I had everything in there: the original deed from when I bought the house, the title insurance documents, the survey from the county showing my lot as a standalone parcel with its own identifier, and every tax record going back years. I also found my service agreement with my trash company, which had been renewed annually and was completely current. I was building a file. Not yet sure exactly what I was going to do with it, but I knew I needed to have everything organized before I took another step. Then things got stranger. I came home one afternoon and found a large beige trash bin sitting at the end of my driveway. It had the waste company's logo on the side. It had been placed right next to my existing bin from my own trash company, like they were trying to make the substitution look natural. I stood in my driveway for a moment looking at it. The audacity was genuinely impressive. They had not asked, they had not called, they had not left a note. They had simply dropped a bin on my property as if ownership of the space was already a settled question. As if I had already agreed to something I had absolutely never agreed to. I wheeled the bin around the side of my house and left it there. I was not going to use it, and I was not going to create a scene about it, but I was also keeping a record of the date it appeared because something told me that was going to matter later. The bills kept coming after that. They switched from quarterly to monthly, and each one had a new late fee stacked on top of the last. Within about 6 weeks, the total they claimed I owed had climbed past $180. The notices from the HOA started using bold capital letters in the headers. Words like final notice and legal action pending, formatted in a way that was clearly meant to create a sense of urgency and fear. I put every single one of them in a folder. The social pressure came from a neighbor a couple of weeks into this. He lives 2 houses down, one of the newer builds, and he has always been the kind of guy who takes his HOA membership very seriously. He volunteers for the landscaping committee. He puts out seasonal decorations in ways that technically comply with the community guidelines while also making sure everyone notices how enthusiastically he complies. I do not dislike him. He is perfectly pleasant. But he has very much bought into the idea that a neighborhood association is a kind of miniature government with real authority, and that anyone who does not fall in line is a problem to be managed. I was out in the front yard doing some pruning when he walked over. He had his hands in his pockets and that very careful, measured expression people get when they are about to tell you something they think you do not want to hear. He said in a very patient tone that he thought it would just be easier for everyone if I went ahead and signed up for the new trash program. He said I was making things complicated and that the HOA board was frustrated. I asked him why the HOA board was discussing my property with him. He said it was just talk, that people were concerned. I told him I understood that, and I appreciated that he was trying to be helpful, but that my property was not part of the HOA and I was not going to pay fees to an organization I had no legal relationship with. I said it as plainly and as calmly as I could because I did not want the conversation to become a thing. He said the board did not see it that way. I told him the county recorder's office did. He did not have an answer for that, so he nodded and walked back down the sidewalk. That was the end of that conversation, but not the end of the discomfort it created. It stuck with me. The fact that the HOA president had been talking about me to other homeowners, framing me as the unreasonable holdout, was its own kind of pressure. These things have a way of spreading. You become a topic at the monthly board meeting. People start viewing your property differently when they drive past. You go from being the quiet older neighbor with the nice trees to being the one who is causing problems. Even when you are completely in the right, that social friction is real, and it wears on you if you let it. I decided I was done being patient. The conversation with the neighbor was actually useful in one way. It reminded me that I was not just dealing with one person's mistake. There was a whole system here, a board of volunteers who had convinced themselves they had authority they did not legally possess, and a community of homeowners who reinforced that belief by going along with it. Nobody had ever pushed back in writing. Nobody had made them prove their authority. They were used to getting compliance through sheer confidence and persistence, and it had probably worked enough times that they stopped questioning whether it would work on everyone. I was going to be different. I spent a weekend at the kitchen table with all my documents spread out in front of me. I had my deed, the county plot map I had requested from the registrar's office, my trash service contract, and a growing stack of invoices and notices from the HOA and their waste company. I wrote down a timeline of every interaction, every phone call, every piece of mail, every date something happened. I noted the date the unauthorized bin appeared on my property. I noted the date the neighbor made his comment. I noted the date of the certified mail receipts I intended to request. Because I was going to send a letter. Not an angry letter, not a pleading letter. A formal, documented, carefully worded letter that would serve multiple purposes at once. I had done enough reading by that point to know what I was dealing with. HOAs do have authority over the properties within their defined boundaries. That authority comes from recorded covenants and restrictions that are attached to the deeds of properties within the development. Those covenants are public record. If my property was genuinely subject to HOA rules, there would be a document on file with the county proving it. There was no such document. I had already confirmed this. My deed had no HOA covenant attached to it. My property was a standalone parcel that predated the entire development. The HOA had simply assumed that geography meant jurisdiction, which is not how any of this works. So my letter was going to do a few things. First, it was going to state clearly and simply that my property was not part of the HOA and never had been. Second, it was going to attach the evidence, the deed, and the county plot map as proof. Third, it was going to demand that they produce whatever legal instrument they believed bound my property to their organization, and make clear that if they could not produce one, their silence would be treated as confirmation that no such document exists. Fourth, it was going to formally demand that all billing, collection activities, and further contact about this matter cease immediately. And fifth, because I felt like it was warranted, it was going to include an invoice. Not a real lawsuit or anything that dramatic. Just a straightforward accounting of the time and expense they had forced me to incur through their negligence. 4 hours of my time spent researching this, gathering documents, and dealing with their calls and letters. I set a rate of $75 an hour for that, which is conservative, and a storage fee for the bin they had placed on my property without permission, $5 per day starting from the date I documented its arrival. I did the math. The total came out to just over $350. I drafted the letter over 2 evenings, printed everything out, made copies of all the attachments, and then I drove to the post office. I sent the whole package via certified mail with a return receipt requested. That last part was not optional. I needed a paper trail showing not just that I sent it, but that they received it and signed for it. In my experience, people who want to pretend a letter never arrived have a much harder time doing that when you have their signature on a green card. The letter was addressed to the full HOA board, not just the president, all of them. Then I went home, put the duplicate copies in my file, and waited. I want to describe what waiting feels like in a situation like this, because people who have not been in it might assume you just move on and stop thinking about it. That is not how it works. Every time I checked the mail for the first week, I was scanning for either a response or another threatening notice. Every time the phone rang from a number I did not recognize, I felt a small jolt of anticipation. The uncertainty is its own kind of stress, and I think that is very much by design. Organizations that use pressure tactics rely on you feeling unsettled during the silence. They count on you picking up the phone and calling them, giving them another chance to repeat their demands from a position of false authority. I did not call. I had said everything I needed to say in writing. The next move was theirs. The first week was quiet. No new bills arrived. No calls. No more bold capitalized threats. The return receipt came back in the mail about 4 days after I sent the package, with a signature on it. They had it. They had read their names on the envelope. Someone over there had looked at the stack of attached documents and understood immediately that they were in a very uncomfortable position. I did not know what they were going to do next. I did not know if they would respond or stall or try some new angle. What I did know is that for the first time since this whole thing started, I held every card. They could not claim ignorance of my property's legal status anymore. They could not pretend the invoices were just administrative oversight. I had put it all in writing, signed, and delivered. The second week passed, and I still heard nothing. That was fine. I was not in a hurry. Then I walked out to the side of my house one morning to check on a sprinkler head that had been giving me trouble, and I stopped. The bin was gone. At some point overnight, without any notice, without any explanation, the waste management company's bin had been quietly removed from my property. Just gone. No note, no call, no acknowledgement of any kind. It had simply vanished the same way it had appeared. That was the moment I knew. They had made some phone calls after they got my letter, probably to the waste company, possibly to whoever handles their legal questions, and whoever they spoke to had told them something they did not want to hear. Something along the lines of, "You need to remove that bin and stop sending invoices to that address immediately." But I still had not heard from them directly. The third week came and went. The 30-day deadline I had set in my letter for them to either produce the governing document or remit payment on my invoice was getting close. 4 days before that deadline, an email arrived. It was not from the president, it was from the HOA secretary, a different name entirely, and the message was short enough that I could read the whole thing in about 15 seconds. It said that after a review of their records, they had confirmed that my property fell outside the boundaries of their service area. It said the outstanding balance on my account had been cleared and that they considered the matter closed. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the stress they had caused, no mention of the unauthorized bin they had deposited on my property, no mention of my invoice, just a clipped, bureaucratic little statement that was clearly written by someone trying to make a problem disappear with the fewest words possible. I read it twice. Then I opened my invoice template, updated the document to show it as past due, and attached it to a reply email. I did not write anything in the body of the email. The attachment was the message. I did not expect a response, and I did not get one. But that was fine. The point was not to collect the money, although it would have been nice. The point was to make sure they knew that I had not forgotten about it, that I was keeping track, and that their tidy little "we consider this matter closed" statement was not something I was just going to quietly accept as the final word. My final word was the past due invoice. Let them sit with that. Life went back to normal after that. The threatening mail stopped completely. The waste company never appeared on my property again. My own trash service continued as it always had. Same schedule, same crew, no interruptions. About 2 weeks after the email exchange, I saw the regular driver at the end of my street and he waved at me from the cab, which he does every week, and I waved back. It sounds small, but honestly in that moment it felt like a symbol of everything that had just happened. That truck being on my street, same as always, was the whole point. I learned a few months later through some conversations with people in the area that the HOA president had not been re-elected at their annual board meeting. From what I heard, a number of homeowners had raised concerns about how she ran things, specifically mentioning that she had a tendency to act without checking whether she actually had the legal authority to do so, and that it had cost the board in both time and credibility. She was not the only issue they raised, but she was a significant one. Apparently, there had been a few other situations under her leadership where she had pushed people around and it had not gone well. I will not pretend I felt bad about any of that. I want to be clear that I did not set out to get her removed. That was not my goal. My goal was to protect my property and stop a fraudulent billing scheme before it could do any real damage. Everything that followed from that was a consequence of her own choices. She decided my address was in her jurisdiction without checking. She decided to threaten me with a lien. She decided to have a bin dropped on my property without asking. She decided to keep sending escalating notices rather than just pulling up the county records and spending 30 seconds confirming what I had been telling her from the start. Every single one of those was her call. I just responded to each one. That is the thing about people who rely on intimidation and bureaucratic bluster to get what they want. They work very well against people who are confused or who do not have access to information or who are just tired and want to make the problem stop. What they do not work against is someone who spent 30 years building systems to track exactly what documents exist, what they say, and who has a copy. I kept my file on this for about a year after it was resolved, just in case anything came back up. Nothing ever did. Eventually, I moved everything to a box in the garage and filed it under a year that I would rather forget. But I did not shred it. I never shred anything. These days, I am back to my regular routine. Coffee in the morning, garden work when the weather allows, gutters before the rains come, and every week the same truck comes down my street, picks up my bin, and drives away. The driver and I have built up a whole wordless routine over the years. He honks once when he turns onto my block. I wave from the porch if I happen to be out there. It is a completely unnecessary exchange that serves no practical purpose, and I genuinely look forward to it every week. Some things are worth protecting. Your home is one of them. Your right to make your own arrangements, honor your own contracts, and live your own quiet life without someone else's bureaucratic overreach intruding on it is another. Know your documents, keep your records, stay calm. And never, ever let someone tell you that their database overrides your deed. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This happened a few semesters ago where I was taking a course in urban design. Everyone was grouped in threes, but one of my group members wanted to join another group with their friend, so I ended up with one other person. Not sure why the professor though this was okay, but I wasn't too worried because I was fairly confident in my ability to do the work. The course incorporated previous studio courses to tie together in a massive topic of urban planning, which included architectural design, environmental sustainability, urban infrastructure, and historic preservation. I tried to brainstorm with my partner on which direction we should go. My idea was focused on residentials as housing would address a huge demand here in NYC. However, my partner seemed content on making the project about industrial buildings, so I focused there. We brainstormed on different ideas, but got the impression that he just wanted me to take the lead as he mostly agreed while not giving much input. Weeks went by and I constantly updated my partner on my progress via WhatsApp while rarely getting any update or feedback from him. It annoyed me a bit, but I was still confident in my work, which was enough to get us through the next checkpoint during our next presentation. At some point during the semester, I got a really terrible kidney stone. It wasn't from junk food or a poor diet, in fact, it was from eating too much black beans and chickpeas. A side note, I asked ChatGPT to come up with a healthy dinner plan to give me a list of food, which I used to come up with a meal plan that meets my macro needs. See comment for more. I did feel way better with my new diet, but it eventually led me to having my worst kidney stone of my life that put me in the ER. I was on all kinds of pain meds and had to stay there for several nights, but it didn't end there. The stone was so big that it got stuck. I needed surgery to put in a stent. Don't look up how they put it in, it still gives me nightmares. I had to wait several more weeks and endure pissing deep red blood daily and having yet another surgery to remove the stent. Before finally recovering. Throughout this whole time, I managed to put in some work into my project. I was surprised to learn that my partner did absolutely nothing and waited for me to continue my work. Like what, the actual duck? To make it worse, I learned that he tried to present my work as his own. How can people be like that? I emailed the professor about my situation. I explained how I've did all the work so far and sent him screenshots of the chat as well as my project file, which includes all the history logs. The professor reminded me that during the final submission, everyone had to put their initials on the slides of the work that they worked on. Okay, got it. Luckily, I was recovered and ready to present my work. I left out the initials as it wasn't required for presentation, only for the final submission. I felt the need to see what he'd do. I even tried to cut him some slack and gave him some talking points on the parts I'd allow him to claim as his own, even though it was fully my work. He didn't. He kept cutting me off during presentation to talk about my project as if he had anything to do with it. He mostly repeated the same information that I mentioned while not bringing anything of value to point out. The final presentation had several judges who were comprised of local professional and high-level position within the industry. The conversation was always directed at me, so I had a good feeling that everyone understood that I did most of the work as I knew all of the intimate knowledge of the parts. Then came the last day to submit our work. The final slides included my initials on every single page. Apparently, my partner missed that part about the initials and also submitted an older version of my work. A few weeks go by and I hit him up asking what he got. I was surprised to learn that actually passed with a C+. He was surprised to hear that I received an A- and promptly said that he'll have a talk with the professor on why he received such a low grade. Honestly, why are there people like this? Anyway, not sure if it's malicious compliance, but I did do everything as instructed and ended up having one hell of a semester. Did I mention that I had morphine for the first time during my ER visit? LMAO. The next one is an entitled People Story. Here's another story from my time working at a very popular theme park in Florida, a magical rat planet of sorts. One year I was promoted to trainer at the resort I worked at. It came with a special pin and an impressive $1 increase by the hour only on training days. Oh boy, I was best at pizza shop and the soup and sandwich shop, S&S. So those were the two bays I trained newbies in. One day I was tasked with training a new elder manager I'll call Esther, fake name, in the S&S shop. Apparently Esther had worked at the magical rat planet before but had quit for some years and had returned to this resort where she had never worked. Our training session went well and Esther and I got along fine. She rated me highly on my trainer form. It's customary for newbies to train 2 weeks before being set free on their own. This particular resort had a lot of food bays and a store, so there was quite a bit to learn. However, Esther received less than a week of training and they gave her the okay to manage us. She didn't know what she was doing most of the time due to this. I don't know why they made that decision, but honestly, many things at that job had gone down and were crappy. We had a computer system that chose positions for the workers. However, the managers would often manually place us in the positions we were good at or enjoyed. Many people had worked there for over 20 years, literally doing the same thing. The lady that trained me had been there for 20 years and only worked in pizza front and S&S shop, which is why I was so good at it after her tutelage. This system worked and everyone was happy. Well, except Esther, who felt that the computer should make the decisions. One day I was scheduled to clock out at 4 p.m. I had made plans with some friends to go out and things were already set and paid for. Esther approached me and demanded that I stay until 9 p.m. and train a newbie and close S&S shop because the trainer called out. I politely declined and explained that I had prior engagements and that things were already paid for. Well, she didn't like that and said it was a courtesy that she even asked as it was my job as a trainer to step in when needed. She said that technically she could extend my hours and make me do it. I responded that managers could also train and that a part of their job was to step in when workers weren't available. I was polite as she was older. I apologized again and said I couldn't stay. She narrowed her eyes and walked away angrily. From that day forward, she harassed me. One day, when she was supposed to be making rounds, she stopped to watch me and burger back, BB. Due to my autoimmune disease, I don't regulate temperature well, so BB was my most hated position, as it was extremely hot, and the movements hurt my joints. Esther watched me for 30 minutes until I accidentally dropped some tongs. She then proceeded to berate me about not being careful enough. Esther started purposely moving me to burger back so I could be uncomfortable. She would get angry when other managers would move me to pizza, S&S, or cash. She constantly berated me and only me about my appearance. My nails were too long, my makeup was too much. Was I wearing the appropriate socks though no one could see them? I was constantly in tears and started having panic attacks before going into work. I had other crap going on as well and her constant harassment was piling on to it. The final straw was when I had a terrible tooth infection. It required an emergency visit where I was given strong antibiotics and some hallucinogen-level opioids. As I was filling my prescription looking busted, I ran into the head manager, Jay. He instantly knew something was wrong as I didn't have on makeup or a wig. I think he was afraid until I explained the situation through tears. He kindly gave me the rest of the day off. After the infection calmed down and the pain subsided, I returned back to work. Jay had informed everyone and the other managers and workers kindly asked about my condition. Not Esther. As soon as she saw me, she started in on a full uniform and nail inspection. I went to Jay and reported her for workplace harassment. I had witnesses that reported her as well. Jay spoke to her and apparently she said I was a spoiled, disrespectful brat. Jay told her to knock it off, but by that time I had put in a transfer and was moved to another position at a park that I enjoyed a lot more. I learned from my friends at the resort that Esther turned her venom towards others, and one girl quit after being yelled at by her. A lot of people started quitting for various reasons. I mean, over half of the staff, including the people that had worked there for decades. It's like I started a chain reaction. They sent in a corporate psychologist to assess the situation and conducted employee interviews. Esther and my name came up a lot. Esther was moved to the sit-down restaurant area full-time, but she later left due to having a heart attack. Anyway, thank you for watching.